Good day to you. My name is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. Today I'm presenting to you a video that was done with Legacy Conversations in South Africa. You might call them our sister presenter. Legacy Conversations is run by Koos Kotze, and they present all of the videos from men and women who fought in the South African Defence Forces. They've started to advertise on our channel some of their videos, and we're doing the same on their channel. And we both felt it was appropriate that if one of our servicemen served in the South African Army or Air Force or whatever, that we would actually show the videos that Legacy Conversations have done with them, because they've been servicemen or women that fought both in Rhodesia and South Africa. So Peter Baxter did an interesting talk on Fighting Men in Rhodesia, episode 148, if you want to have a look at that. And then when he left Rhodesia, he moved to South Africa and served in 101 Battalion, which I think is Kuvut, 121 Battalion. And today he's going to talk about his experiences in those two units, as well as weapons that were used in the South African military, which should be quite interesting. So I think we're going to get more and more of these guest appearances from Legacy Conversations. Koos Kotze has given me permission to show some of the appropriate videos on Fighting Men in Rhodesia, one where Rhodesian soldiers fought in the war there. And I think with John Finsal's permission, I haven't asked him yet, we'll be showing some of the South African clips. Some of them are very interesting, like the raid on Lobito and Angola, and many other things. And so keep your eye on this space, and I'm sure you'll be seeing more of these guest appearances. Thank you.
Hello, Internet. I'm excited here because for the first time in about 3 episodes, I actually get the chance to speak to Peter Baxter. Now, you will remember we had an episode with him. I think Fossi made it. Very interesting, Rhodesian Army officer. And then he came south. He actually passed the recce selection. And then he said no. For some reason, he can explain himself. And then he joined 101 Battalion, where he became quite famous. Now, guys, we are busy here with what I call the weapons type of equipment type of series on Legacy, because it's good to hear a man's story. I love to hear the stories. It's 99% of what we do. But I was thinking there might be some children and people listening here. We don't know the equipment we use that well. And so we made the first episode, the R1 and the R4 rifle. It went very well. Want to thank all of you for your comments, things like that. We had great fun, and we're going to record another one with the same two gents about platoon support weapons, which is a 106 and the mortars and the machine guns and things like that. It's going to be an eye-opener. I'm still looking for a Casper somewhere. I want to do a detailed thing on a Casper as well, if I can find one, because that was a marvelous vehicle. Let me tell you, I was a Casper driver of note, man. I was a great Casper driver. I say that without any hesitation. But then I recall to myself that we really need to understand the different units, to understand what weapons were used, a little bit of what tactics were used. And this was dealt with in an episode which came out again with Peter and 101 Battalion and Fossi. They made a video on that as well. But I want to know what weapons were used, and I also want to know the sleeping bags. Let me explain why the sleeping bags, because, man, I'm really not into the Brokeback Mountain or what's that crap, you know, that movie of humping males or whatever you call it. I'm not into that. I'm not saying any further, but I cannot be cold enough to leopold there with a mate of mine. That's never going to happen with me. I'll rather annoy the sergeant so he chases me around, I get warm. That works for me. But I soon found out that the South African Police Force, the coin units, the equipment was designed in Rhodesia, and therefore it was fantastic, but it was so most horribly not suitable to South African conditions. It was just cold, man. We did not have enough warm clothes. It was horrible. And our sleeping bags were from the same place, I suppose. I mean, it was just bad, man. I mean, if you were deployed in the South African borders to a place like Lesotho, we were needed because there were farm attacks, there were the ANC trying to get into the country. We were doing a counterinsurgency, counter-terrorism things there. It got so cold that you actually saw the Casper standing in the snow And you see these policemen are huddling like this around a fire, you know, and like really, really cold. And then Peter said to me offhand, he said, man, you know, the sleeping bags in Rhodesia, same story. But let us first start. Peter, can you give us a little background of yourself, please? And welcome here. Thank you for coming to the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Nice to talk to you at last. Appreciate it. I wasn't a legend at 101, right? There are a lot more famous guys than me at 101 Battalion. I'm just trying to tell the story of what a great unit it was. Introduction, I was born in Rhodesia in 1962. I went into the Rhodesian Army, or the end, 1979. I was too young to join. So I ended up on an officer's course, did the officer's course. I served with the RAR. After that was done, I then moved on to training officers at the Zimbabwe Military Academy eventually. Then that was untenable. I left there. I went to 121 Battalion for a couple of years, 3.5 years. After that, well, during that, I did recce selection. And everyone asked me, why did I say no? Well, I was a 19-year-old two-pip lieutenant, and they wanted me to be a corporal first. So I said, no, thanks. And moved on. And then once I'd finished at 121, I went and did a bit of Civvy Street for a while. And then 87, I got the hankering again. And I went to 101 Battalion. And that's basically what my history was. 101 Battalion was a great experience, as was the RAR. And my training was incredible. So to talk about the sleeping bags, which is one thing that you mentioned, all right, the sleeping bags in Rhodesia were horrendous. They were these very thin nylon little things that, yes, you could carry it around and you could get into it. It was more of a mosquito deterrent than it was cold deterrent. And although it didn't get that cold, where I was based in Inyanga, it got freezing cold because of the high mountains. So like the Drakensberg, like Lesotho Mountains. So they were terrible. When I went to 101, I'd had the mispleasure of using the SADF sleeping bags as well, which were not great either. I think they were 1938 design, and you had an inner and an outer and a whatever else, and it was heavy as hell, and when it got wet, it was terrible. So when I went to 101, I bought myself a 3 Spears sleeping bag. And the 3 Spears sleeping bag with 2 of those nice heavy grey woolen blankets on top of you. It didn't matter that it was minus 13 in the bush in Angola South. So that's how we survived. Again, like you talk about the fires, we used to light fires at night to attract the tours. The idea was to get them to attack us so we could go and shoot them and kill them the next day. So that relates to that, all right? The other question you asked was 101 based on Kufut? I believe the answer is yes. And the reason I say it's yes, because the Kufut guys were lucky enough to have access to the Caspers straight off, where the 101 guys ended up using buffles at the beginning. And the difference between the two that I can assimilate, and I'm not an expert, right? I'm just telling you my view and my opinion of it, is that the Kufut guys would normally work in 2 teams together. And if there was a big fight, they would then come and maybe 2 or 3 others would join them. We in Transverse worked almost entirely in Angola we did work entirely in Angola during the year I was with 101. And we worked in company strength. So you would have company commander vehicle, you'd have the company sergeant major's vehicle, you'd have 4 Querfels as logistics, you'd have a big diesel Bowser that was running around behind us, 10,000 liters of diesel normally, and you had your 16 Caspers. Each team had 4 Caspers. And of course, they were heavily armed. The more you could put on them, the better it was. So one of the things I'm going to do for Forcy later on is I've got a whole lot of pictures which he wants me to put into like a video format and talk through. And one of those is pictures by Stephen Bortma of one of the Romeo Mike armories. So our troops always took their rifles home. We never had our troops leave their rifles in with us. They always took them home wherever they went on vacation or leave or whatever you want to call it, PTO. I mean, I'm so American now, it's PTO and leave and whatever else. But they always took it with them. So your armory was basically the 3.0 Brownings, the MAGs, the 5.0 Brownings, and if you had a 20mm cannon or any other fancy thing that sat inside it. All right. So I think that should a little bit to the thing. Yes, it was Kufut tactics copied, but expanded to be on a military type basis. So, example, in 87, before I got there, they attacked Mongua. 101 did. And that was done with, I think, 3 companies, somewhere around there. I wasn't there, so I can't speak to it completely. But then if you're doing that sort of thing, you need to have 16 Caspers in a row running up at the enemy, not 4 of them or not 8 of them. So I think that's how it is. And the adaptation was a lot based off that. We learned a whole lot from the Kufut guys. And then when we got into Angola, we had to adapt again to other things. I mean, we used to hunt the Su-22s and the MiGs by going and burning tires in the middle of Shaunas and sitting with SAM 7s waiting for them to fly over and try and shoot them down. So that was something I haven't told in my last few interviews. Okay, but at the end of the day, the whole thing goes back to weapon craft and what you do. And funnily enough, I've got 5 or 6 pages of notes, but I write very big, so don't worry, we're not going to be 2 hours, all right? And the very last note that I have at the end was I got into 101, and on the Monday before we went out into the bush, they took us out to the Panikis factors and said, right, you guys need to test the machine guns and all that. And one of the Caspers still had just the old single MAG with the bicycle wheel mount. And the troops came up to me and they told me, Lieutenant, this thing is a piece of crap. It don't work. It doesn't shoot. It's not very good. And I sat there and said, come guys, has anyone taught you actually how to use an MAG? So we sat down and we opened up the gas regulator, pulled it out. The thing was so worn that it just unwound by itself as you shot. So what I taught them was you take a piece of 9-gauge wire and you wrap it around the barrel, and that holds the gas regulator fully open. We put 500 rounds through it, and they all looked at me and said, how? How did this work? It's like, add oil, add wire on the gas regulator, you're done. That thing will work. Anyhow, that particular Casper was changed out fairly quickly after that and got twin 3.0 Brownings. But that's just one of the things. So going back to this, I think one of the things that struck me was the 2 colonels did a pretty good job of telling us about the training and the dash down, crawl sights, observe fire and all that sort of thing. But I want to add a couple of more practical points to it, okay? So I was trained on the FN, FAL, Rhodesian R1, great rifle. If you know how to look after it and you know what to do with it, it'll do anything that you want. And I then worked with the R4s, but also during my training in School of Infantry in Gwelo, I did 106s, 81 more mortars, 61 more mortars, talk-ons of hunters, talk-ons of lynxes, all that sort of thing. So it was a very comprehensive course, which stood us in good stead. And I've brought that out before where we were using 106s on Caspers outside on Jiva. But going back to the R1 and R4 and the Galil and the G3, for an example, because I know you want to talk a little bit about that as well. So the initial, I'm not an total historian, okay? But the German army made 5,000 STG-44s. Those 5,000 were supplied to the German paratroopers, their elite soldiers, in late 1944. Those, a couple of them were captured by the Russians. And that's how Kalashnikov got his design. He took the STG-44 and he took all the fancy stuff. So the Germans are too finicky, right? I own a Luger pistol. It's a horrible shooting pistol, right? Not a great machine, but it's such a legend. Everyone wants to buy one. But the STG-44 had a whole lot of really good capabilities, like the intermediate cartridge. It was called the 7.69 millimeter. They used Kurtz, K-U-R-T-Z. And that was the cartridge that they used for that. It was an intermediate. It was designed as an assault rifle. Off that, Kalashnikov copied a whole lot of all that and came out with the most stunning rifle, of which something like 120 million have been made around the world, somewhere around there. So that's to give you the idea of how the AK developed. The R4 was developed by taking an AK and an R1 and picking the 2 best capabilities of each and throwing them together in one thing. So let's take an example. A straight 20-round box magazine is a pain in the ass to reload, and its springs always go loose, and there's always a problem somewhere along the line, where the AK curved magazine gave you a good feed and really ran pretty well. So that was one of the main things. The second one was the way that the gas regulator worked and the way the rotating bolt worked. So they picked out all the best of all the bits and pieces and put it together. One problem that I think that they've discovered with the Galil is it's too expensive to make compared to the new M4 AR-15 platform rifles that are around. So I think that's one of the reasons you don't see so many more or so many Galils in the Israeli combat theater right now. But that's a logical thing. All right. I had the pleasure of also working with troops who had G3s. So in Rhodesia, the Portuguese sold us a really sorry bunch of G3s, and that's what got issued to a lot of the new troops in the independent companies. So from about 1978 onwards, all of the old Rhodesia regiment companies were badged RAR, and they were flooded with recruits from depot RAR, and all of them were trained on G3s. So that was where I got some exposure on it. Major Andre Dennison, who was a really well-known company commander of A Company 2 RAR, he occasionally used a G3 just to prove to the troops that at the end of the day, you know, it's a weapon. It does the same job. It's a little bit more tinny than an R1, but that's fine. And I remember a picture of him in his book standing there with this funny bush hat thing on and his G3 up in the air and his one eye sighted over it. And, you know, when you get that, that's showing by example. So I did a little bit of that with him, but I also learned how to shoot a G3 because we had guard force at my father's hotel. So I grew up at the Zimbabwe Ruins Hotel. First was Shepherd's Hotel over the valley. 1974, the terrorists burned that down. Then we bought Zimbabwe Ruins Hotel. And then I grew up there, but I was at boarding school, so I'd only be there for 3 months of the year. And the guard force guys also, when they would go shooting, they'd take me with them. So I'd go and learn and see. And while I was there, I carried a 303, which was a Lee Metford action with a Bisley barrel. And I would carry 10 magazines with that, so I had 100 rounds. Everyone said to me, "You're nuts." I said, "It's better than nothing, better than nothing." I was one of the school kids who escorted the buses to and from town when we went to Salisbury for weekends. And most of the masters were terrified. They were given automatic shotguns. They didn't know the front, the back, the side, or anything of it. But I learned to shoot with that 303. It was the old one with the brass butt and all of that sort of thing. So, you know, everybody slates the G3. When I did recce selection, the other 140 guys all had G3s and I had an R1. That was it. And there were no issues. Nothing happened. We used a different weapon because we used the Beretta AR-70 at the time. There weren't enough R4s to go into recce's for the training at it. And I'm just trying to put practicals into here so that people understand weapon training is an art and it's a passion. So when I was working with the Zulus, a Major Boertis came along to us a couple of times, and he came and stood around a few days while I was doing, you know, range drills with the company that I was with at the time. And he walked up to me and said, "Peter," he said, "you have an absolute talent for teaching Africans how to shoot." He said, "because the normal is they just close their eyes and pull the trigger, but somehow you've got them into something else." Well, Major Boertis was incredible. I watched him with a 303 rifle, 10 rounds, all went into the bull faster than an FN or an R1 could fire at single shot. He was incredible. What a nice guy. And I believe him and Commandant Waterfall had worked together for years as well. And that's where the whole pretext of the training thing about not giving the guys an opnieuw on the way to the range came from. Because the whole problem with doing that is as soon as they heard shooting range or skitbarn, that was it. They went into reverse. They didn't want to learn anything. They knew they were just going to get the snivels beaten out of them on the way, you know. And the whole problem behind that was they then didn't want to learn and they didn't want to become good shots or anything. Where what we did was we tried in the transverse to turn around and say, right, we're going to run to the range, but there's no sandbag PT and anything on the way. When you get there, you'll have a rest, and then we're going to go and shoot and do what you do. And yes, my 9mm occasionally came out to move a few lazy asses, but that was just how it was. You know, the whole thing behind it was to teach them how to shoot. So I was very lucky in the fact that my first pellet gun I had at the age of 6 or 7 years old. I learned to shoot off that, doves and whatever else. At the age of 14, I bought my first 22 rifle, which I still have today. It's a Creco bolt action. And from that, I learned how to teach people to shoot. So at the end of the day, it's just a talent for being able to do it. There's some guys who can do it, and there's some guys who can't. But also the teaching of the platform. That was more important than anything else. And I don't think a lot of people realize how important that was. Your breathing, your squeezing the trigger, following the shot through. Everybody turns around and says, that's BS. That's not BS. That's how you can shoot straight. I didn't shoot busily, but I went a few times to Hammersdale Range, and I went and shot there, and I could do a falling plate at 800 meters. No problem. I couldn't do it today because my eyes are getting worse. But the whole thing behind it is the teaching of people. But one of the biggest things that really astounds me, and America particularly hasn't got this right, is people are not shown what a bullet does. They don't understand how powerful that little projectile is, whether it's from a 9mm, 5.56, whether it's from anything along the way. The whole thing is inertia and impact. So one of the things that I started to teach my guys was we would take a 44-gallon drum of water, and you put a 44-gallon drum of water up, you hit that with an R1, bam, that thing jumps in the air nicely. You hit it with an MAG with about 40 rounds, and it does a dance. You do it with an R4, it does a dance, but in a slightly different way because of the inertia of the bullet. So as you know, and as you saw, there's that Ian McCollum thing where he did a test on 3 different items. I sent you the link. It's a cool video to watch. The only difference is that he used a 77 grain round for the 5.56 instead of the normal 55 grain. That would have made a lot of difference to what that can of water did at the end of the day. So that was something I tried to teach, was so that people figured out how dangerous a weapon was. The American shooting problem here is exactly that. It's caused by PlayStation, where they think you just walk up and you plug the guy with a syringe and he's fixed up and he starts walking again tomorrow. You know, it's like, no, that don't work, boys. This stuff, it hurts, and when it hits you, it's bad. So that was, you know, pretty much the start of where it all went. I've done many, many, many different weapons, so that's why I'm going to talk about the practicalities and the different things. 30-round magazine. I have 8 of them for my FN in America. and they work. And I also have what's called a Halbeck compensator, which when you put that thing on the front, that barrel doesn't even move. All right? So it's a pretty cool machine. You had some of the Rhodesian guys who welded 2 together to get a 40, but it wasn't quite a 40 and it didn't really work that well. I also have a 10-round magazine. And the reason for the 10-round magazine is that if you walk with your rifle and they can't see a magazine on it, a lot of the guys think, oh, no, he's stupid. He's unarmed. He's not unarmed. He's got something going on. So that was a pretty big one. And as I say, I have a Halbeck compensator. It works damn well. Right. I also did the Bren, the 303 and the 762. The 762 was more in South Africa when I was at the Zulus. We didn't have MAGs originally in 82 and 83. So when we went on border duty in 83, we took Bren guns with us. And it wasn't bad. You know, a lot of guys hated the Bren gun because it was heavy and you had to have magazines, but everybody in the section could supply them if you had R1s. So that's how it worked. And that's what the logic process. The Bren is one of the most accurate machine guns that you will fire in any time, anywhere, and anyhow. All right. I've talked about the R1 on automatic, R4 on automatic. That's just a spray and pray to get out of trouble, really. We carried 50-round magazines on our rifles at 101 Battalion. It was a great initiator of a contact and a replier to a contact if you needed it. And it also meant that the troops didn't have to change 2 magazines in the time that you had the one on. So 50s were the preference in the vehicle first, and then they would change to the 35s. I've told you about the water barrels. 5.56, very interesting rifle as well. I have a Colt 6720, which I bought here in the US. We've shot 25,000 rounds through it, and the barrels, it's the bullets tumble now. Yep. So it still shoots, but it's you know, it's not a sniper rifle anymore. The 7.62 gives you a very heavy punch. And I think that's one of the reasons that so many people like it. It'll go through a 2-foot tree. I showed my sons a couple of years here ago here, and they were like, yeah, okay, straight through, like a knife through butter. All right. We used the AR-70, the Beretta AR-70 at the recce's. Great rifle as well. 30-round magazine, not a 35. And it was just a great weapon. So it's a preference at the end of the day for the coin war in the bush, in Ovambaland and all that. R4s was a great rifle. R1s were good, but they had a lot of sand problems. And also you had to carry a lot more ammunition to try and keep up with what went on. Again, resupply, very interesting. If you had 5.56 and MAGs, for the 101 guys in Kufur, it wouldn't have been a problem because you had the supply vehicles, the Blesbok or the Querful. So you were full up of ammo in there. But if you worked it out, if everybody had R4s, everybody could feed from each other's Querfuls. So it gave you a lot more flexibility. Your first line in Rhodesia, a trooper was about 250 rounds. So you carry 6 to 8 magazines and the balance in boxes around you. And on top of that, you carry 2 50-round MAG belts as well. That was your first line ammunition. With the R4, it was approximately 350 rounds altogether. So almost 10 full magazines at 35 rounds a pop. I'll talk a little bit about other items. So I have an old FN FAL carry handle, the old rubber one, which has the sight adjuster on the front of it. And I have a couple of different sights which I use here to interchange. It's a great sight adjusting tool, really good. Magazines wise, R1 10 round, 20, 30, and the 40 round and the home raids. R4 is a 35 and a 50. The 50 is an excellent magazine, but like the colonel said, it's the troops then try and stand a thing on the barrel and get sand in the barrels and all sorts of other funny things. In a Casper, that was it. If you walk in patrol and you're carrying the rifle all the time, doesn't matter. That's what you need. All right. The Bren 20 and 30 round magazines, the 30s were brilliant in a Bren. They were really, really super smooth because it's feeding downwards. There's inertia driving it down. Right. I talked about us using the 7.62 Brownings on the Caspers. That was good. We also used 5.0 Brownings. So most of the Caspers at the end ended up with a window 3.0 Browning, a 3.0 on top, and a 5.0 or twin 3.0s on top. And that worked really well. And they were brilliant machine guns. Marksman training, very, very important. The two colonels touched on that as well. The point behind it is if you get guys to enjoy shooting, they'll actually do very well at it. And that's the real secret behind it. You know, small tips like when you're doing the dry firing exercises, you put a coin on top of the weapon so that when they squeeze the trigger, the coin won't fall off. When they pull the trigger, the coin will fall off, and you can teach them how to change that. All right. Basic training. One of the things that I found was the weapon efficiency gives you the edge. The whole extension of your body is incredible. So from about the age of 10 or 11, around there, I carried a rifle all the time. So if I went from my house to the reception at the hotel or anywhere, you carried a rifle. You just learned how to do it. That was just life. And I think that's a really important part of teaching soldiers how to do it and how to look after it. You make them have it all the time. It becomes an extension of the body. Magazine loading proficiency, really important. The recce's are very good at making you do that and doing well. I mean, my weapon proficiency on that course was 92%. The marksmanship was terrible, but they kept giving us different rifles, so you never knew where it shot. You just pulled the trigger and moved on. Your rifle is an extension of your arm, and that's one of the reasons that the Rhodesian army used pokey drill. So pokey drill was PT in the morning using your rifle, and you would swing it up and around and sideways, and guys thought this is a real pain in the ass. But what it did was teach you that your eyes follow the barrel all the time. So it's always interesting. You watch the movies, they don't follow the barrel all the time, right? The barrel's poked around here and the eyes are going over there. And I was like, oh, really? So That's one of the big reasons for poker drill, and I was very effective at that.
I think initially to be physically fit on the course is an advantage, because the first 10 weeks is very much concentrated on the physical aspect, and if one is not fit, then you're going to be exhausted by the time evening comes, when you're supposed to sit down and start doing a little bit of extra work and getting your kit ship shape and this sort of thing, and you're going to suffer as a consequence.
Rifle grenades. When we did recce selection, I was the only guy who had an R4. The other 140 guys had all G3s. They then decided we were doing rifle grenade practice, and everybody shot a rifle grenade off my R1. So that's quite a machine. I mean, that rifle did a damn lot of good. Talking about the weapons on automatic, the R4 is a lot easier to control, but it's not the best way of shooting. But again, when you start teaching your guys about Drake shooting and becoming the extension of their body, they start to learn where that round goes and what it does and how it does. Same as when you're teaching MAG gunners. MAG gunners, I mean, most of them who are really good, they'll put it up in their shoulder and they'll fire from there. But the majority will fire it from the hip, off the belt, over the shoulder. You've got to teach him how to let his eyes follow what's happening. First couple of rounds, that's your sighters, and then you start shooting. All right. I did a lot on semi-automatic shotguns. My dad had an Osana, Beretta A5s in the Rhodesian Army. South African Army, we didn't have any, but I had my own Franchi. I had a right gun, which I used to haul around. You were talking the one day about the weapons that might have been left in Rhodesia. There were many that were taken out, let me assure you. We used to get to the parade square at about 4:45 in the morning, and there would be these Samuel 100s and Queffel 100s and Rattles and you name it, and they were just laden with boxes of Brens, MAGs, whatever we've been given. There was some left behind, yes, I agree, but the majority, I believe, was out. So that should clear some people's minds a little bit about it. MAG experience, I was a marksman on MAG as well. The nice thing about the MAG is the barrel, that you can interchange the barrel, and that makes it easy to use as many rounds as you can. I think I got up to about 1,800 rounds before we needed to change a barrel on one of them. But we didn't let it melt, you know, and I've got a pretty good picture of a red hot cooked one. Not bent, but straight. And then with the MAG, if you give someone 200 rounds, you'll have a great hole in a brick wall, like about 1 meter by 1 meter. And that'll show the people what it can actually do. It's one of the reasons that the Americans kept the M60, the pig, in their service, because originally they had the M14 when they got to Vietnam. So they had 7.62 for both weapons. And then the pig was the squad machine gun. And it was just so powerful for what they could do. So when they were fighting in the cities, that was really where it came into its fore. We've talked about penetration. You talked about the stopping power of an R4 versus an R1. Major Nortman, before I got to the Lomba River, him and Rian Labuskachny were going to go and rescue the one rifle that had been shot out. And there was a Fapla troopie inside looting and grabbing all the rat packs and all the rations he could. And he'd filled his pack and he put it on his pack. And as Nortman got there, he took off like a scared hare. And Nortman fired 5 rounds at him and the guy didn't go down. Every round into his pack full of tins didn't go through. Very, very interesting. So quite that's why I'm trying to talk about is this practical side of things, what people see and figure out and understand. If you go to the bullet grains, R4, you got 55, 62, 77. I think they've even got an 85 here in America. They've got an armor tipped round, a green round, which is quite a nasty thing. And with the R1s, normal NATO ammo is 147, I think. And then 168 grain is the hunting. That guy, when he did the test, he was using a 168 or more. I can't remember the exact number. I didn't go back and look at that. But that's another link you can put on for your guys to see, because that gives you a beautiful view of what those rifles do. The G3 we talked about. One of the reasons that the Portuguese used the G3 was it as a cheap rifle. They had a lot of conscripts, so their guys were obliged to do 2 years all the time. That was it until 1974 when the revolution came. But they were clever because their G3s linked in with the HK-21 machine gun, so you could use the same bullets all the time, and that was what their whole thought behind it was. Couple of guys who used G3s. I told you about Denison. Another guy called Captain Bob Cox, who's an American engineer who was in the Rhodesian engineering squadrons, and he carried a G3, didn't want an FN. So nope, don't want that. I want that thing. So it was very, very interesting to see that. Guard Force used the G3s, the RAR used the G3s, the support and guarding people, so RDR, the Rhodesian Defense Regiment used G3s, etc., etc. It was just we were running out of money to buy FNs all the time. And then we also got the squeeze from PW. I was reading something today that is actually horrifying about what happened, but that's the way it went. One of the other things or problems that you had with the G3s was the broken butts and the broken stocks because of the plastic. They sort of redeveloped it. I know the South Africans called it the R2, something like that. And they developed a really nice front end stock for it that didn't break very easily, and the same on the back. But I mean, if the stock broke, you just got another one and put it on and moved on. That was simple as that. Broken cocking handles was another issue with the G3s. And a lot of guys just say they were junk. They weren't junk. It was better than having nothing. You could have had an old 303 rifle given to you, similar to what the police in Rhodesia originally used to carry, you know. So that wouldn't have been fair. Another pistol I used was the Star 9mm. When I went to A Company 3 RAR, they were independent companies, so they'd been given whatever came in. So Stars were what were prevalent there. When I went to Support Company, they had Browning high powers. But that Star was a brilliant little pistol. All the gun blue came off because it got wet in a leather holster, but it still carried on. It fired TER ammunition, our ammunition, whatever you threw at it, it just did. Really great pistol. Told you about Commandant Waterfall. One of the comments I really want to make was that everybody just giving the troops oppies on the way to the shooting range was such a waste of time. That was just so counterproductive to producing a great shot that my mind was blown by that. It was just really wow. You know, how do you actually logically think that you're going to teach somebody something when he's so tired that he doesn't want to do anything? Another way that I found for teaching people shooting is using a little BB gun first, then a pellet gun, then a 22 rifle, and then you get into the bigger stuff. And by doing that, you progress them because a lot of people actually have an inherent fear of weapons. Not so much South Africa and Rhodesia, but other parts of the world where people just don't know weapons, you know. Another weapon that we had a chance to use on the communist side was the Chicom Type 68. That's a copy of an AK, but a much better weapon than an AK. And then there was also the Gurunov medium machine gun, which was the same round as the PKM. That machine gun was awesome. It was pretty damn close to an MAG. They would have it mounted on this little two-wheel thing that they would pull along and on the outside. And when that thing started talking, you listened very, very quickly. Other items that we found were very good for training was jungle lane. It was excellent for teaching you instinctive shooting. So we started to try and get a lot more ingenious because it was just a pain having static targets walking down a bush lane and shooting at them. So we would spring them from behind trees. We had wires that they slid down from the top end to the bottom end, so you had to shoot the moving target. We had them mounted in tires, so they rolled down the hill and you had to try and shoot that. And we did them jungle lanes with R1s and with MAGs, so that they learnt instinctively how to point and how to do. Your whole teaching needs to be that where your finger points is where your whole weapon direction runs, and your eyes. The two must always run together. Another one that the two colonels talked about was Drake shooting. We in Rhodesia enforced that a lot because by using FNs, you had a whole lot more power, and that bullet would throw all the rocks and sticks and all the stuff in the guy's face. And once he got that, he would normally jump up, and that's when you shot him. So that was the whole idea about Drake shooting. The weapon familiarity I've touched on already. I believe that it's got to become an extension of your hand, of your arms, whatever you want to talk about it. We grew up with weapons, so it's easy to do. So my wife always says to me, she says, "Man, why are you not worried about these things? You leave them all over the house and whatever." I was like, I grew up with them. I know what they are. I know what to do, and I respect them. The problem today, they have none of that. They don't figure that out. And when you get them to a range, they're so shit scared they don't know what to do themselves. I've got a fair old collection, but I'm not going to talk about all that now. But I built myself a Galil here, and I used the local armory to do it. So they're pretty keen on me, because it's like, wow, we've never built an Israeli type rifle before. And I bought a parts kit and a few bits and pieces, and said, right, this is what you got to do. That was cool. And I have a whole lot of magazines for that, the 35 rounds and the 30 rounds, and I've got 350s as well. So there's a bit of a collection, just in case these funny fellas who come over the border do their thing. My first contact was in probably June of 1979, and my mom had a GM15, which is a copy of a Czechoslovakian, very crudely made submachine gun. Had a 32 round magazine, fully auto, and it was a pretty cool little weapon, I must be quite honest. So the one day the Guard Force guys were hanging around, my dad was in town, there was no one of authority to say to me, you stay in the hotel and all that. I said, let's go. We went for a walk, and about 2 kilometers from the hotel, there were 6 tours walking in their file, and you could see them from far away, the white coats and the AK slung under the coat and the whole shooting match. So we had a bit of a contact with him, but it was quite a distance contact. So that GM15 was damn useless. And the G3s, they didn't get near them. But that was just part of the experience of life, how you do it. I've told you about the 101 battalion and the gas regulator for the MAGs. Very important. A lot of people just do not realize how important that part is in that machine gun. And then my final talk about it is myself, Michael McCann, and a guy called Michael Ford were walking, or not walking patrol. So during the day, we would park the Caspers up and try and stay out of the heat. We always parked them in all-round defense as such. And the troops would all sit there and talk BS and do the whole thing. So that day I said, come, let's go. And the 3 lieutenants, 3 of us walked out. Michael was the 2nd lieutenant. Michael Ford was the 2nd lieutenant. And me, and we walked down this pathway. And we're walking outside, checking the world out, looking for spoor and seeing what's going on. And the next thing, this tour comes bumbling down the path, probably about 250 meters away from us. But the path was veering quite far away. So I opened up on him with the R4. 3 rounds, didn't hit him. The bullets all hit branches and bits and pieces, and it was just out the way and gone. So the talk about the deflection is a very, very true part of it. But you've got to know what your rifle can do and how you can do it. And that's really all that it comes down to. For me, the teaching is the most important part. It's teaching guys how to do it properly the first time around, so that it instinctively becomes, this is what you do, this is how you do it. Those recce instructors were brilliant. James Taker, Ray Godbeer, Wayne Ross Smith, all of those guys, they were brilliant. They really were, and they did a lot of that. Especially with the young recruits who were doing recce selection. So you just learn and you keep on doing that. You teach your guys to reload and reload and reload magazines. It's just an important part of the world. So Chris, that's about what I got for you. I mean, I think it should give you enough ammunition.
Well, I've got a lot of questions actually.
Carry on.